Hi, this is the video for IV medication administration. For today's video, we are going to be administering or starting a primary of D5 half NS at 75 an hour. We're going to give a secondary of moxifloxacin 400 in 250 mils at 250 mils an hour and 20 milligrams of IV furosemide. So our 20 milligrams of IV furosemide is in a small vial in 2 mils. I have to give this over a minute, so I'm going to dilute it just to make that easy because 2 mils is such a small amount of fluid. I'm going to take a 10 cc syringe, and I don't want any part of my tip of my syringe to touch anything. And then I have an 18 gauge needle. I don't want any part of the 18 gauge needle that I'm going to screw into the syringe to touch anything. When I take this cap off the needle, I don't want it to touch anything, including like my fingers. I don't want my fingers on top of it, guiding it into the vial. Once I take this cap off, I don't want this needle to touch anything. I'm going to remove the cap off my furosemide. And I'm going to stick my 18 gauge needle into the vial of furosemide. So my concentration of this vial is 20 milligrams per 2 mils or 10 milligrams per mil, and my dose is 20 milligrams. So I need to draw up 2 mils. And the vial only contains 2 mils, so it's the whole vial. But you still look and make sure it's 2 mils. And I have air bubbles. So I'm hitting them, and then as I'm holding this, my fingers aren't touching the needle. They're just touching the vial. So I have 2 mils of furosemide, or 20 milligrams in here. And I don't want that to touch anything. And I'm going to dilute it with just a normal saline flush. And I'm just going to pull some fluid into the 10 ml syringe that contains the furosemide, and I'm not pushing it back any into the syringe because I don't want to lose any of my medication. But that gives me the opportunity to dilute my medication, and again, it just assists in it being easier to give over a long period of time. So I'm going to remove this needle and put it in the sharps. I'm pushing up my fluid, and I'm trying not to spill any, my saline and furosemide mixture, and I'm capping this. And I'm going to take the label off my furosemide, and I'm going to put it on my syringe, so now I know what this syringe is. And I'm just going to reach over and put this in the sharps. So this is my primary set, and I just took it out of the bag. Parts that I want to keep clean are the parts that I'm going to spike the primary bag with, and the parts I'm going to attach to the patient. I've hung my primary solution. I'm taking off some of these stickers or papers holding it from looping. Not this bottom one though, because I don't want that to touch the floor. So I'm going to loop this around, and I'm going to squeeze the chamber. I'm taking off the cap off of my primary solution. I'm taking this cap off, and I don't want this to touch anything. And I don't want to touch like the inside of the primary solution. So I'm just squeezing up. And I want to be cautious that I don't pierce any of these sides. If I pierce one of those sides, it's no longer a closed system and it's considered contaminated and you're going to have to start over. So there's no fluid coming because I pinched it, and I have my little chamber here. I don't have it completely full because I want to be able to see it drip. So now I have the end of this, and I'm just going to put it in towards the sink, and my fluid will start to run down. So it's dripping just a little bit, that's why I had it in the sink. But now that I know my tubing is fully primed, I'm clamping it. So I'm taking this blue piece off. I'm clipping this here, and I'm putting this little clamp in here, and I am pushing the tubing all the way in, because if not, it's going to detect air. So next thing I'm going to do, get my alcohol pad, and I just have that ready. I'm going to get my secondary tubing ready. Same thing with this one. Once I take this off, I don't want to get this spike contaminated by touching anything. And this part, I'm going to screw into here, and I don't want to get this dirty. It still has a cap on this. This doesn't have a cap on it. I'm going to clean it before I attach this. That's what I needed the alcohol pad for. So secondary bag. And I have my secondary tubing, and I'm cautious not to touch this on anything. I'm squeezing the chamber. I'm pushing it in. And then before I flip this over, I'm just kind of clamping this because I don't want any air in there on the bottom. And I open this. So I'm over the sink, and the tubing is primed. This little cap didn't allow any of my fluid to go out on this particular extension set or secondary set, but I'm going to clamp this so that when I take this cap off to attach it to my primary fluid, it doesn't leak everywhere. So with my secondary tubing fluid, I want it to go in first, so I want it higher than my primary tubing. So I accomplished that by hanging my primary fluid a little bit lower. If I could get this off. I'm just using this hook to make my primary fluid lower than my secondary, because whatever's higher, this is my secondary, whatever's higher, because of gravity, is going to flow or go in first, and then the one lower will go in. So I'm going to locate on my primary tubing where I can hook up my secondary tubing. Because this may have touched anything, I'm going to clean it vigorously for 30 seconds. And I'm just double checking that clamp because I don't want to drip antibiotics all over the floor. Now I'm sticking this in there, and I'm screwing it on. So I've screwed that on. Now I can open this. So I have my primary and my secondary all set for when I go see my patient. I'm going to take 2 flushes with me. I'm going to take my furosemide. And I'm going to take, let me take care of this right away. I'm going to label both my primary and my secondary with today's date or the date they need to be changed, because they need to be changed every 72 hours. So I'm labeling the primary tubing and I'm labeling the secondary tubing for when they need to be changed. So when I get to my patient, I'm going to come back in the room. I'm going to re-pull up the MAR and identify the patient with 2 patient identifiers. I already have my IV medications ready and I have my IV push ready. After I've identified the patient, I'm going to tell them what I'm going to do. And before I give any IV medication, I'm going to get rid of my air and my flush and a check for the patency of the IV. There's not an alcohol cap on your IV. Clean vigorously for 30 seconds. I just have a normal saline flush. And I'm just assessing to see that the IV flushes easily. So after I flush the IV, I'm going to take my IV push medication and just re-verify what it is. I haven't taken the flush off the IV, so it's still clean inside. I'm going to attach my IV medication and administer that over a minute. With my flush still being on there, it doesn't allow the part of the needle-free port to touch anything or become contaminated. So after I administer my IV Lasix over a minute, I'm going to take a second flush and slowly administer that to flush any of the medication into the vein. So on this, I could have left a flush on there, but I did not. So I'm going to have to clean this again before I attach my primary fluid. So because this, I let it, I took the flush off, so it was open and it could have touched his arm, or probably did touch his arm. I'm going to have to clean it with alcohol again. After I clean it with alcohol, So I would clean this with alcohol. I'm going to attach my primary fluids. Then we're going to come back to our pump. So I'm going to select a channel. This is channel B. So we want to do a basic infusion. Well, let's see if it lets us do. Well, we'll do D5, half NS, and we know that our rate is 75. So I'm going to hit my rate, 75. Volume to be infused, or BTBI. So I have 1,000 mils in the bag. If I do it to 950, it'll start beeping when there's only about 50 left in the bag, and it keeps your fluid, your tubing from getting air in it. Or you could do it at a lower amount, like 200, and it'll beep when only 200 have gone in, but it gives you the opportunity to assess your patient and make sure your IV site is still good. I'm not sure if you guys can see that very well or not. So I'm going to hit start. I'm just checking the line. Occlusion. I forgot to unclamp this. Restart. So I selected channel B. I have my primary infusion. Down here I can do a secondary infusion. I could either do a basic set and put my own stuff, but a lot of these pumps now are smart pumps. So if you choose your antibiotic or whatever medication you may be giving, and you put a rate in there, it's going to let you know if it's safe. And we have 200. Trying to hit rate. So I'm doing 400 milligrams in 200 mils at 250 mils an hour. So that was the setup for our IV push drug, our primary medication, and our secondary medication. I have this set at the rate for my my secondary medication. I just want to make sure it's higher and that it's open. So I restarted it. I just moved the tubing around because it was saying it was occluded on the patient side. Okay, so that's the recording for IV medications. We'll talk a little bit more about it on Tuesday, and we will go over it more on Thursday and Friday. Thank you guys. Have a good weekend.